All right, welcome into the podcast. It is barely a podcast. Bill Zimmerman with you, along with Mason West, of course, regularly of Bare Bones. And we are here. We save these barely a podcast for basically emergency podcast, breaking news. Didn't do it last night, but Mason, we wanted to get on the microphones here and talk about Jaylen Johnson, who Ryan Poles has secured on a 4-year extension, $76 million. My first reaction was win for the Bears, win for Jaylen Johnson. I thought this was a really great contract, and it's great that Jaylen Johnson doesn't have to play the franchise tag game, holding out in training camp, OTAs, all the stuff that would have been. And then if it doesn't get done, then there's the pressure next year. So the fact that this got done still before free agency, despite the tag, Mason, I just thought this was great that this got finished.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's one of those situations where you don't want the headache. That's the biggest thing. You don't want the distraction. You're going to have a lot of changes coming up for this Bears team going into the summer, as you talked about, through OTAs, training camp, et cetera. And it continues what Poles has been doing, where if you play well, you get rewarded. It doesn't matter if you're a part of this regime or the last regime. We saw that with Cole Kmet. We're now seeing that with Jaylon Johnson, and he played like a top 5, if not number 1 cornerback last year, and now he's getting paid like it. And in good news for the Bears, I thought it was going to be over 20 mil AAV, but it coming in around 19, that's fantastic for them. It gives you a little more leeway in terms of what you can potentially do in free agency. And at the end of the day, you lock down a position that's very important for this team, and it's going to be very helpful going forward.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And like you said, locking down that important position. And what they've done now is they've locked down the secondary. Now, I know they need a safety piece here, but they have everyone else locked down for a minimum of 2 years in that secondary. That secondary is going to be able to grow together. It's got a little depth. So this is really good. And like you said, the contract structure is such where it's not a market resetter. And we really, I think a lot of us thought market resetter or really close to it because of the fact that Ryan Poles punted this a couple times, but was still able to get it done. And then you look at the totally guaranteed money, the fully guaranteed money, got to use the right terms, the fully guaranteed money. It is just a hair below the top contracts. It's right there with Jalen Ramsey. The total guarantees, creep up to about 55 million. That's not record setting, but when you're Jaylen Johnson and you have chronic shoulder issues and you had an issue at the end of the season again, and you've got a really strong contract here where you're basically knowing that you're going to get $55 million and change your family's life trajectory in terms of that life-changing money. Not that 18 million, 18 and change, whatever that tag was, anything to slouch at. But with these type of things that Jaylen deals with in his career, and Mason, you're the perfect guy to ask about this, how important do you think it is to just make sure you get this locked down and don't play the year on the tag? You've got an issue. You missed 6 games in 2024. And then where are you at for the 2025 season? So I thought this was a really smart move by Jaylen and his team. Yeah, maybe they wanted to reset the market and they couldn't quite get there, but they got a really strong offer with really strong guarantees for a guy that does have some health concerns.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back, I know I did a talk on this back when I was helping Chicago Audible, but he got a ladder jet procedure done on his shoulder. Basically, you take a little chunk of bone from the cork and you move it, and that helps to reduce the chances of dislocation going forward. And if you look at Jaylen recently, he really hasn't had a ton of specific shoulder injuries, but he's had some nicks and bruises and wrists and all these kind of things that have added up for him. And when you do that ladder jet procedure, you are inherently changing the biomechanics of the shoulder, right? You're still going to have a restricted range of motion, and that's what the bony block is supposed to do. And you'll see that he plays with a shoulder harness and all that jazz. But when you change the biomechanics like that, it can affect you long term, right? I mean, you're going to have other things that have to compensate. You're just not moving in the same way. Different muscles are used differently, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, when you land, you're going to get different forces in the neck and the wrist. So like you said, this is good that he's locking this in, because down the road, yeah, there can be potentially some problems. But with this contract that he's got, he's going to be able to have some security. He's going to have that guaranteed money, but he's still going to be able to get back out there if he can continue to do what he did. Now, my biggest hiccups were some of the injury issues that, again, weren't directly related to the shoulder, but then also the lack of ball production. And this last year, he changed that. He started to get his hands on more balls, no pun intended or anything like that. But that's what a number one corner has to do. Where there's still some meat left on the bone, yeah. I mean, we can think of at least 2 different pick sixes that would have changed the outcome of 2 different games for the Bears. But you're hoping that another year in this system, that he's one of those guys that doesn't get money and all of a sudden the hard work changes. And I don't think that's the case for him going forward. This is something that was really good for him to get done. And as we talked about, very good for the Bears to get done.
Yeah. And like you said, was able to kind of get some of those ball hawk maneuvers, get some interceptions, make some big splash plays that hadn't been part of his game yet. And I think part of that is the idea of building up the secondary around him. I think, and Jaylon Johnson, and I've talked to Brad Spielberger about this, about grading and everything, because Jaylon Johnson's grades in the past weren't very good. And I was just like, yeah, but he's a good cornerback. He's a really good cornerback. And Brad kind of explained how the grading system works and everything. And basically what was happening to Jaylon Johnson is those grades that you see for coverages are really only when you're targeted. It's not nearly as much when they go away from you. So if Jalen's doing his job and locking down a receiver time and time again, and they're able to pick at all these lesser corners, he's not getting the recognition because there's so many other options. But when Tyreek Stevenson starts flashing and Kyler Gordon's doing things and the secondary's coming up, then quarterbacks don't have a choice and they have to try and thread the needle to Jalen. And I think that really helped pick his game up and allowed him to do other things when he just wasn't on an island of misfit toys as the only capable cornerback on this team. So, I know Eddie Jackson's no longer there. That's going to be a change moving forward here for 2024. They need to bring in a safety. But Mason, as we kind of just talk about Jalen here and kind of transition into free agency for the Bears, this secondary, add that right piece at safety, Julian Blackmon, Fuller, we've heard a couple of the names that the Bears might be pursuing, that makes sense. But when you have a lockdown guy like Jalen and you have really strong pieces around him, Montez Sweat's there to help with the pass rush. We know we need more up there, but it's getting to the point where the Bears are on the cusp of really being able to make passing the ball against them a really difficult proposition.
I mean, yeah, you look at some of these advanced metrics, and the Bears were a top 5 unit near the end of the year there. I mean, that was one of the reasons why they were in a lot of these games and winning a lot of these games. Now, again, I already use this phrase, was there some meat left on the bone in terms of finishing some? Absolutely, but even that did improve. Like you said, there's a lot of talking heads, there's a lot of really smart people out there that are talking about the Bears secondary being one of the best secondaries in the league, and it's not hard to see why. When you have a guy like Jaylon Johnson, you have Tyreek Stevenson going into year 2. He's a very aggressive guy. He got a lot of penalties that you'd like to see reduced, but hopefully, getting a little smarter as you go along there. Jaquan Brisker is a bit of a divisive topic. I mean, I'm a Brisker guy. I just think that last year he played through a lot of injuries that people don't know about, and so he kept getting hurt. No, he was re-aggravating something because he felt he needed to be out there because, but let's be real, the depth at safety is abhorrent. I mean, that's one of the things we're going to talk about with free agency in the draft is you can't have Elijah Hicks as your emergency break glass in case of emergency guy. You just can't. You saw that he's not even a dude. He's less than a dude. So, I give a lot of credit to Jaquan Brisker for doing what he did. He did break a record for all that's worth if you want to, put that feather in his cap. And like you said, if you look at the list of safeties that are available, depending on how much you want to spend, I mean, there are a lot of safeties that are available.
Oh, loaded.
That's loaded, strong safety, free safety. It's kind of pick what you want. And that's going to make it going into the draft a little easier if you can snag one of those guys for an appropriate contract.
Yeah, so let's talk about safety. You started talking about Brisker. Let's start kind of talking free agency a little bit. How the Bears and Ryan Poles address safety, I think it's pretty straightforward here, but it is interesting because of the fact that we're seeing this shift, and you saw a lot of players, Diggs and some of these guys complaining on social media about what has happened to the safety market this offseason with guys like Justin Simmons being cut, like guys just getting blasted out into free agency because we're not spending money on safety anymore. Eddie Jackson's going to be out there. Eddie Jackson is still a good player. He was an important part of this. Maybe Eddie Jackson even has a possibility to come back. I doubt it, but I just wonder what kind of market he's going to have because of how loaded this safety market is. It's going to push prices down, and the Bears are not going to have to spend a lot of money. I mean, trying to, spend 5 figures a year, or I should say, 10, now 8 figures a year. There we go. On a safety to add in this defense, I don't think is smart, because you're going to be able to get quality players for probably $5-6 million per season because of what's happened to this safety market. And that's going to impact Jaquan Brisker a year from now, because if this is the way the NFL is trending, he's going to be up for that extension in 2025, as is Kyler Gordon. And the way I'm a much bigger Kyler Gordon fan than I am a Jaquan Brisker fan. Brisker is a very capable player. I'm not ripping him, but the way this is trending for safeties, this very well may be the kind of thing where you bring in affordable safeties, and guys like Jaquan Brisker, who maybe deserve extensions, maybe the Bears just go, look, we're going to pay Kyler Gordon next year. We want to keep him around. We think he can do some special things. We've already paid Jaylon Johnson. We think we might want to pay Tyreek Stevenson a year from now. Jaquan, you're going to be in a tough situation.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. And it really, I think, depends on what kind of safety you are, right? How much are you in the box versus how much are you floating?
Sure.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I do think Eddie might get a better deal than many think, because he still has that ability to make plays out in coverage, get some interceptions, pass breakups, things of that nature. You mentioned Julian Blackmon. I think he's a guy that's very interesting. PFF has him as a projected 2-year, 5.75 average per year kind of guy, which that's exactly what you want contract-wise. But play style, almost half of his snaps were down in the box in 2023, and because of his average recovery speed, it really helps. Does that pair well with Jaquan Brisker as a type, or I don't care, whatever team you are, do you have 2 guys that are very good in your line of scrimmage? Who is your cap over the top? So that's why a guy like Xavier McKinney, who did play very well as a true free floating safety, is expected to get closer to $13.5 million per year.
Right.
So, I mean, you have to factor all that in, of course, and you dive into what the Bears, yes, they have a lot of cap space. You go to Bears Twitter and everyone thinks you're going to be making it rain because of how much that they have. But there is a big difference between effective cap space that you have and money you have on hand. We saw that last year. Bears ran on Mike McGlinchey. They ended up not getting him because more, guaranteed money was handed to him by the 49ers. I mean, good. McGlinchey is mid-Glinchey. I'm glad he didn't end up here. I'm very happy with Darnell Wright on the right side at this point. But at the end of the day, that guaranteed money matters, and that's where you have to factor that in when you're looking at these contracts.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think a lot of Bears fans have to keep in mind. And when Mason and I talk about, Mason's talking about the guaranteed money and cash flow and that kind of thing, it's obviously that's different than the cap space. And the Bears have cap space. And if you've listened to Brad Spielberger, if you listen to him kind of break that down for us when we did our mock-off season earlier this week, if you haven't checked that out, I'd recommend checking it out on YouTube or the podcast channel, because EJ Snyder, Aaron Lemming, and Brad, forget me, those 3 guys, Brad Spielberger, they carried it with their expertise and really broke down how the offseason works.
By the way, that was an amazing podcast. I loved listening to every second of it. I wish it was longer. 2.5 hours wasn't enough.
That was we went into it expecting 2 hours, and then we're wrapping up free agency at about an hour and 55 minutes. I'm like, I don't know when this is ending, but so much good conversation, so much good content, and I thank you for the kind words on that. That was a lot of fun to put together. But the Bears, look, here's the bottom line with the Bears, and everyone wants to say the McCaskies are cheap, and I don't think that's true. I think the problem is the McCaskies aren't independently wealthy. They're not some family that made $6 billion, $7 billion, then went out and bought the team and still have multiple $1 billion off to the side. The McCaskies are wealthy because of their asset that is the Chicago Bears, so they don't have as much cash. I'm not saying they're broke, but they don't have as much cash as some of the other teams on hand. So what happens with free agency, you sign Jaylon Johnson, perfect example here. You sign Jaylon Johnson to this contract with those guarantees. That guarantee, that first chunk of money, that goes into escrow. Now we know Jaylen Johnson's getting $28 million in cash this year. Jeremy Fowler reported that, so a lot of that's just going to be pushed to him this first year. But the rest of that, the $20 million or so left, that's fully guaranteed, that goes into an escrow account. The Bears have to have that cash on hand and put it in an account, so that's guaranteed to go to Jaylon Johnson in due time. So if you sign Christian Wilkins to a 4-year, $100 million contract with $70 million guaranteed, that guaranteed money needs to go into an escrow account. So you need to have, if you're going to be a huge spender in free agency, you've got to have 150, 200 million cash on hand. The Bears have this whole thing going on with Arlington Heights. They've got things going on. So it's not going to prevent them from signing guys. And I don't want to sit there and be like, they're not going to do anything. I think they're going to add to the defensive line. I think they're going to probably get a tight end, maybe a wide receiver. We've heard running back. We'll get into all this a little bit here before we wrap up. But the idea that they can just flagrantly spend because they're like, oh, they have enough cap space. They can get Christian Wilkins and Jonathan Grenard. Well, in theory, yes. You also don't want to have 3 defensive linemen, in essence, averaging $22-23 million a year between those 2 and Sweat. But that's where it's going to be different. Like, talking to people in Bears organizations in the past, like the Bears, the McCaskies give them a cash budget and say, this is how much cash you can hand out. So that's where when I sit there and say, I don't know if they're going to spend on a Christian Wilkins. I would give Christian Wilkins 4 years, $100 million, not sweat about it at all. No pun intended there with the line mate, because of the fact that I expect them to have a rookie contract at quarterback this year. And that money would be off by the time that contract needs to be extended. And you're going to pay your quarterback $60 million or whatever. So I'd be fully supportive of spending huge on a guy like Christian Wilkins. I just don't know if the Bears will.
Yeah, I think we're just really lucky that we have all this information at our fingertips with Google, but also just with the relationships we have, knowing Brad Spielberg, you talked about, and some of these really smart cap guys and people who know what's going on in some of these organizations. And that's why we're not like anti-Bear. We're not like, don't have fun, don't go after these guys. It's just simply, this is what's happening. This is what happens when you're not Jerry Jones, who's an oil mogul, or who's got like the Fords who just own all these the car stuff. When your money is tied up in the team and that's it, this is the reality of these things. And, you got to be smart. You have like different contracts that are going to be coming up in the future. You can't just look at this year. Ryan Poles and some of these financial guys are looking multiple steps in the future. Who's going to get paid soon? When's money added? When's it coming off? So you just have to be smart with these decisions. You want to be able to play in the markets in the future years, right? Next year's wide receiver free agency, which again, no one ever makes it to free agency anymore. So that only goes so far, but you got to be smart with these decisions that you're making. You can't put all of your eggs in the defensive basket because eventually you got to start paying some more on offense too.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's what I say. Like, I'm totally on board with paying for the defense right now and drafting for the offense. Yeah. Because, over time, when those contracts come due, these big contracts off the defense are going to be coming off the board. It can be renegotiated, or let go, whatever it might be. And then you can kind of spread it out more evenly. Now, when you have these big contracts on defense, what you decide to do with guys like Brisker and Gordon and Tyreek Stevenson before that big money comes off, that's where it gets a little trickier and you got to start navigating some things. That's when, I think Ryan Pace made a mistake where he paid too many guys on defense and in essence had Khalil Mack already making a quarterback contract, in essence of what that was in 2018, that was almost a quarterback contract on its own. I think then quarterbacks were, pushing about 40 million and he was, 27, 28 million. So, at this point now the quarterbacks are making 55, 60 million, having Montez Sweat at 25 and Jaylen at, 19, or 18, I guess, that still doesn't equal one quarterback contract. So I'm okay with them doing this right now. And I think that's kind of the way that Ryan Poles has been setting this up. And I think it makes a lot of sense. But again, you can't just say, all right, we're going to pay these guys and then we're going to absolutely extend Brisker. We're going to extend Gordon. And then all of a sudden, when the offensive guys come due 4 years from now, 3 years from now with Darnell Wright, you don't have enough money and resources for them. So The one thing I want them to do is I want them to spend. I don't want them to punt a ton of money into the future to do it. I want them to keep, a nice balanced contract like Cole Kmet. Brad Spielberger has talked about on my podcast and other podcasts, how flat it is, keeps the cap hit about the same every year, gives you some maneuverability. So I don't want them to be flagrantly spending, because if they draft Caleb Williams and if Caleb Williams becomes a very good quarterback within a couple of years, which is possible, you want to be able to spend next year and be like, okay, what does this offense need? Let's make sure we go out and get the guy, whether it's an offensive lineman, another wide receiver, like you said, maybe it's even a running back, who knows, like whatever that big guy is that's going to put us over the top. You don't want to be hamstrung because of what you did this year and you weren't quite ready to win, so to speak, and that hamstrings you into the future.
Well put, well said.
So Let's talk a couple position groups here before we wrap up. Let's move over to the offensive side of the ball. Let's talk about running back, because there are some rumblings that the Bears might be spending on running back. Not something I like doing. I said last year, didn't like how much money they spent on linebacker, but they did it. And, TJ Edwards was phenomenal. Tremaine Edmonds was pretty good. They spent on a running back this year. Obviously, they got Herbert. They got Roschon Johnson. Foreman, I'm sure, is going to be gone. But we've heard reporters link them to Saquon Barkley. We've heard reporters link them to Josh Jacobs. I would prefer that money get allocated elsewhere, Mason. If they were going to do it, I would take Saquon Barkley 100 times out of 100 over Josh Jacobs. I'm not the biggest Josh Jacobs fan. I know he had the big year 2 years ago. I think Jacobs is more of a volume guy. You got to give him 20, 22 carries a game to really get him going, get him into the game. A lot of 2-3 yard, rushes. That's not my type of thing. That's not what I'd want to see them do. I'd much rather see Barkley and his pass catching ability out in the flat, and in essence, adding another receiver for your quarterback, even if it is coming out of the backfield, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I'm a running back guy. I mean, I played running back in high school, and I'm all aboard the whole. I think running backs deserve more. This is not what the market is, but it is what it is. I was also the captain of the Juice Herbert train when he was first drafted, and I think he's good. The injury was unfortunate, but you're looking for more in that backfield. You do, like, between the injury to Herbert, the concussion to Roschon Johnson, which definitely limited him, that slowed him up, and the inability to get 3 running backs out there. Foreman was a healthy scratch most of the time. Unfortunately, between guessing not be able to get him on the field, but also I think you do need that third running back to have potentially some special teams looks. It just wasn't a fit. So by whether you're looking in free agency or the draft, you need another running back. Free agency, as sexy as Saquon Barkley might be in a Bears uniform, that'd be awesome. The money does matter, like you said. He hasn't been connected to the Bears, but I think even better fit would be a guy like an Austin Eckler, just because of even more of that pass catching ability out of the backfield. And you still have, Herbert to be that bell cow running back there. I don't think it's going to happen for a variety of reasons. But if it was for me, I would have Eckler first, then Saquon, then Josh Jacobs. I want nothing to do with Josh Jacobs. It's something he's not a bad running back. I just think he's lost a little bit of juice. He just doesn't give you much out of the backfield. That third, the pass blocking isn't exactly what you would like from him, and you already have that issue with Herbert. So why do you need another version of that? I'm fine with just really not spending much here at all. I mean, maybe you're looking like even down to like some of these other guys who are available, like a Zach Moss. He'd be even like on the cheap side just to flip in there. But yeah, it's a fun thing to think about. I would love Saquon if he just took like no money, but he won't.
Yeah, exactly. And Eckler is that guy. And we saw Eckler, and he's lost a lot of juice in those legs, but we still saw what he can do coming out of the backfield when the Bears played him last year. And he, made TJ Edwards look silly. Eckler is still a guy that could do something with the ball in his hands coming out of the backfield, pass catching. So, and as EJ Snyder shared on that, on the podcast on Monday, he met Eckler's agents in Indy, and didn't sound like Eckler was getting a lot of big offers. So that may be a guy that could be affordable if the Bears did want to go that route. So like I said, I'd much rather use, now I don't have really, 5th, 6th round picks, but I'd much rather use picks in that range on a running back, like they've done, like Herbert being a 6th round pick, Roschon being a 4th round pick, those type of positions, and just draft running backs and not spend on them. But let's talk about another position. Let's talk about wide receiver, because, when we did the mock on Monday, the draft nerds, EJ and Brad, are like, spending on these guys doesn't make a ton of sense because they're not very good. But at the same time, there's so much talent at wide receiver. Now, I lost out there. I went with the guys. The guys didn't want to spend on receiver, and they wanted to go all in on the draft on receiver. To me, that's too risky. The Bears, Tyler Scott's a wide receiver 4 for me, Mason. They need a wide receiver 2 and a wide receiver 3 coming out of this by this offseason, which to me means they need a high pick, a 1st or 2nd round pick. And of course, they don't have a 2nd round pick currently in the draft, and a free agent guy, a Curtis Samuel type, whatever it might be. So I definitely think they need to find a guy in free agency to bolster this a little bit and then attack it in the draft as well.
No, 100%. I mean, I still believe there's about a 60% chance one of the two guys, a Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze, is going to be there at 9. It just, to me, makes sense because if you look in the past, you really haven't seen like 3 receivers go that high. There's going to be this run on quarterbacks that'll happen, just depending on how free agency falls and everything like that. And there's some really talented guys up there. You're looking at offensive tackle, you could have 2 different guys that go in the top 10. You're looking on the defensive side, at least one team is going to be looking at one of these defensive guys up there. So more likely than you have a good chance of it falling. However, like you said, it's really risky to just bank on that happening. And even if you did, even if you can get, like, let's say, Rome Odunze at 9, who's your wide receiver 3 at that point? Because like you said, you don't have a lot of draft picks. So, potentially what might come out of the Justin Fields trade when that happens, let's be real, it's happening for anyone who's still holding on as a big Justin supporter. This is happening. Now you're looking at 3rd round. You want that potentially 3rd, 4th, whatever you might get, round guy to be your wide receiver 3. Like, no, you got to spend some money. So, you're not dabbling in as much as I would like a Riley Ridley. I think he's fallen off and going to command too much for what he showed. So you're not looking there. Gabe Davis is a guy that is all flash, but no substance, in my humble opinion. He's going to command about $12 million, but I don't need that in my life. So yeah, you're looking at a Curtis Samuel, you're looking at a Kendrick Bourne, Tyler Boyd's off the list because he just only plays in the spot. So, you're not getting some sexy names, but you're getting guys that can still play, that can still contribute, because your hope is your sexiness is DJ Moore, one of these top 2 wide receivers that are going to be top 3, wide receivers, and be there hopefully at 9. And then guys that can play. That's what you need. You need professional football player.
Yeah, and Aaron brought up the name Noah Brown. That was one that you hadn't brought up. I like that one as an idea too. Mm-hmm. I really like Tyler Boyd, but the fact that he just, the way Shane Waldron, I talked to EJ Snyder about this a lot, the way Waldron runs his offense, Boyd just isn't probably going to be a fit. That was my number 1 guy that I had circled. I'd love Marquise Brown just for the ability to stretch the field, but that's probably not quite a fit either. So it'll be curious. Curtis Samuel, a lot of people talk about how he's best friends with DJ Moore, and maybe that's just a reason there. Possession guy that's going to be the quarterback's going to be able to utilize. There's things you can do with Curtis Samuel. So it'd be curious. It's not going to be a huge dollar contract, but it's curious what they're going to do there. And really quick, before we just wrap up this podcast with the trenches, let's just, I just want to kind of go on what you talked about the draft, because everything that a lot of people are hearing right now is that 4 quarterbacks are going to go before the Bears, that the league's really getting enamored with JJ McCarthy, and these teams like the Vikings and the Raiders and teams like that are going to probably look for a way to trade up to get that 4th quarterback. And maybe JJ McCarthy becomes QB3 and Jaden Daniels becomes QB4. Drake May becomes QB4. That still all has to get settled, I think. But if 4 quarterbacks do go off before the Bears, and let's just say 2 of the 3 receivers go off before the Bears, I think it's a virtual lock that Joe Alt is going to go off the board before the Bears. If that all is true, then there is only 1 more spot available. Forget the Falcons. I'm not talking about it chronologically at 8. There's just 1 more spot for a player. There's been no defensive players off the board in this thing. There's been no, not a second tackle. So there is definitely a possibility. I agree with you that one of these receivers is going to be there at 9. But then the other thing is going to be, what is the Bears' evaluations? Do they love Rome Odunze, but they don't love Malik Neighbors, or vice versa? I think they do love Rome Odunze, but if Malik Neighbors is there at 9 and he's not the guy they want, would they still consider trading back or going edge or whatever it might be? So yeah, it's a very complicated situation, because they don't have that 2nd round pick to fall back on and go, well, if it doesn't quite work out at 9, we know there's going to be 3 or 4 guys we love in the 2nd round that we can still circle back to. They don't have that luxury right now. And if you're waiting all the way for the 3rd round, you don't know if 15 wide receivers are going to go off the board in rounds 1 and 2. With this class, it's very possible. So that maneuvering that wide receiver is going to be difficult. So Mason, let's just wrap up with this. Offensive line, I think the 4 outside positions, whether you love Nate Davis or Tevin Jenkins' health and is a concern, whatever, that's what's going to be the starting 4, you would think. Center. Are you okay with Ryan Bates being the starting center, or do you want more beef there? And then I'll just ask a 2-part question on the defensive side of the ball. How much do you want them to spend at edge as well?
Yeah. No, I'm not fine with that. Partially just because if you have Ryan Bates at center, it's like, what the hell do you have behind that? So I believe the plan is going to be to still look at a minimum in the draft. So, Brian Poles has been very good at accumulating later picks. I think he can do that in some shape or fashion. I'm not too worried about that at this point. So like a Cedric Van Pran stands out to me. Like he has a limited ceiling in my opinion, but he's someone you could plug in at center as a starter, or you have Ryan Bates and then you bring him along. And an idea that is no longer fashionable, I had this idea a little while ago, and how it's become the talk of the town, is getting a Connor Williams. I think, PFF has him as a 3-year, 7.5 average per year. The ACL scared the hell out of me, and I moved away from it. But then when the Ryan Bates thing happened, it was like, oh, look at this. You can get Connor Williams on a pretty reasonable deal because of that ACL. You don't have to rush him back. You have Ryan Bates, who can play basically all 5 positions. And obviously Ryan Poles loved him, hence why he tried to get him a couple of years ago. And when he did play this last year, he was solid. He was 70-something by PFF. And when I looked at his tape after he got traded for, I was like, this is a solid lineman. So that would be my thought process. In terms of edge, really quickly, I don't want a ton of money spent at edge. I prefer it in the middle. I just think you've seen historically this defense does better when you have a 3-tech that can rush the passer. And I think you can try to find edge on a decent-ish deal, maybe a Bryce Huff, or you do look to the draft to get that done. I just don't want to be spending bank on that position when you're already spending it on Montez Sweat and you do currently have a lack of a true pass rush from the middle.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say to that, and then we'll wrap this puppy up. In terms on the offensive side of the ball, here's what: if Ryan Bates is the plan at center and they don't address it anywhere else until the draft, I'd have concerns. But at the same time, I'll say this: if that's not just the plan at center, what I love about Ryan Bates is he gives you flexibility. And that's something they haven't had a lot of. Like Connor Williams. And I know for a fact Ryan Poles likes Connor Williams. Is he going to go out and get him because of the ACL? I don't know. But I know he likes him. So if Connor Williams comes to the Bears and he is not ready in September, he may not be ready till October, November, who knows? You would know better than I would. But at the same time, you can have Ryan Bates play center until Connor Williams is ready. Tevin Jenkins is inevitably going to get hurt. He does every year. This isn't me being an ass about it. It's just the fact that this is what happens to Tevin Jenkins every year. Hopefully only misses like 2 games, but he's going to miss some time. And you have Ryan Bates there to plug him in. Nate Davis struggled a lot for a variety of reasons. Hopefully he bounces back this year. He has the ability to. But if he doesn't, you've got Ryan Bates there. If you need to move Nate Davis to the bench, and moving forward past this year, it's 2 years with Ryan Bates. So if you do have a Connor Williams or Van Pran's they draft him and he's ready to start in year 2, then you have a situation where Ryan Bates, if you decide to let Tevin Jenkins walk because you don't trust the extension with injury, you have an opportunity to put him there. If you decide to cut Nate Davis because he's got 2 years guaranteed on that contract, you can put Ryan Bates there and not have to sit there and be like, well, if we cut Nate Davis, we have to find a guard. No, well, we have one capable there. So it gives them flexibility on that side of the ball. And then just to wrap up on edge, I sit there and go, I feel they need another impact player. And like I said, I'd make it Christian Wilkins. If it's not Christian Wilkins, I don't think there's another 3-tech that's really going to move the needle. So you got to move to edge. Someone told me that Bryce Huff is really too short for the Matt Eberflus profile. So that may not be a direction they go. Jonathan Grenard really fits the Eberflus profile, and he can rush the passer, and especially as a complementary guy to Sweat. He makes a lot of sense there. I'm not sure what direction they're going to go. And if they don't spend big, then the AJ Epinasas of the world tied to Washington make a lot of sense. So Leonard Floyd also, bring back the former Bear, a guy that I know Eric Washington is fond of and obviously fits the defense as well. So Mason, we'll wrap up with this. Give me 2 names that you hope 1 week from today are Chicago Bears that are currently about to become free agents next week. Any position you want. It doesn't have to be big price, just 2 guys you really like that you want to have in a Bears uniform.
I'm going to go with the low-hanging fruit just because I think they're so important. I'm going to go with Wilkins, and I'm going to go with Connor Williams. I just think if you got those 2 names on this team, you'd be set at some very important positions for a while.
I like those 2. I will tweak it. I'm going to say Christian Wilkins again because I'm a big supporter of just a disruptive 3-tech. I'm going to go and a little different. I'm going to go Noah Fant because I know Shane Waldron likes two tight end sets. I know he wants to utilize them. Robert Tonyan was a disaster last year. They need another pass catching tight end. The other guys in free agency, I don't trust completely. I know Fant will be capable in that role. So that's the guy that I would do. I would want a good second tight end so Shane Waldron's offense can hum. So anything else to add here as we wrap up, Mace?
Keep Gabe Davis off this team.
I know some people love Gabe Davis because of the highlight reel, but I do agree there's a lot of inconsistent play. So there it is, 35 minutes, barely a podcast. Mason, thanks so much. Enjoy your vacation, and we'll see what happens next week here with free agency.
Bear down.
Bear down, everybody. Talk to you soon. Adios.